Well, hello, this is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show, and I'm here today with Mr. Richard Burnett. He has his master's in social work, and he's a counselor that's going to talk to us about sociopathy. With the whole Casey Anthony situation with her court trial in the news, there's so much being said about this. All the rioting, all the people that were outside so angry about the verdict. I think mostly they were thinking she might have been guilty. Was that what you thought, Richard, how the crowd was responding?
Well, I was concerned that we not do away with the jury system, and I didn't watch the whole trial. I did see excerpts. I did watch the defense summation and the prosecution rebuttal and most of the commentators, everything from Fox to CNN to the major networks. And it seems to me that that whole family, the Anthony family, resides at Dysfunction Junction.
Yes, that seemed to come out quite clearly. And so where does sociopathy fit into this? And before we get into that, I asked that question even, because we're not going to really debate whether we think she's guilty or not. The jury has spoken, and we leave that at that. But the confusion sometimes is sociopathy versus psychopathy. Can you tell us the difference between those two?
A psychopath is someone who has no feelings for anyone else, is extremely manipulative, could easily kill, but usually it's a one-to-one person. A sociopath is somebody who's across the board, at odds with society and doing everything they can to overturn, sneak around, or sabotage society.
Because I think the one thing that obviously came out of the trial with Casey Anthony, going back to that, was her lying. Where does lying fit in with those? Do you see that in both of those categories?
You see it in both of the categories. John Wayne Gacy is a good example of a psychopath, and Kaylee Anthony might be a good example of a sociopath.
Okay.
Because she lied about her position at Universal Studios. A number of areas were involved rather than just the situation around her daughter.
And does that lead us then to believe that a psychopath is someone to be more feared, or maybe more available to more vicious criminal activity?
Both people kill, so yes.
Okay, I see.
Both people can kill. The sociopath is more likely to wind up in prison, and the psychopath is more likely to wind up on death row. Because the sociopath is more glib.
Yeah, the sociopaths, and I've done quite a bit of research on this. It's always a topic that's fascinated me, as well as obviously a lot of people in the public. But, they are sometimes very glib and charming, and that must be a hallmark, you said, of the sociopath.
Right, you could see that in Casey Anthony.
Oh, very much. Yes. Very charming,
Yes.
I mean, I knew men, it's like, hey, she's hot, It's like, okay, right, yeah, exactly. Don't bring her home to mom,
yeah,
I would
the Black
say.
Widow.
Yeah, exactly. And some of your experience, having gotten your master's in 1972, you said, correct, from Columbia University, and you were actually doing some of this work back into 1965, and you've had a lot to do with youth, correct?
Right. Once I got my master's, I worked for the Jewish Board of Children's Services, Family and Children's Services, at Hawthorne Cedar Knolls, a residential treatment center for delinquent boys and girls.
And we talked about, when I called you, I didn't realize you actually did have an appearance or an interview with Nancy Grace. I've had people say that Nancy Grace was the TV celebrity, whatever we want to call her, that brought the whole Casey Anthony trial to the forefront. Because without her following that and watching that and bringing it to the news, we might not really have caught on to it. So tell me just a little bit about your appearance on Nancy Grace.
I came across Nancy when she was on Court TV, and she was a bit of a different person. It was more the legal issues involved in presenting the trial. And
she was sitting in as a judge? Was that?
no,
no. Oh, no.
She just had the show. She was
Okay.
like the hostess of the show, the host. And it involved a case here in Kansas where the youth center at Topeka insisted on keeping a boy to age 23 because they thought he was a psychopath. And at about 6 months after release, at age 23, he and his girlfriend killed the girlfriend's mother and set the mother's trailer on fire, and he wound up with life in prison.
With life in prison. And the girlfriend, I'm just curious about that case. Did she also go in as an accomplice or something?
Yeah, she was sentenced, but I don't recall what the sentence was.
Right, right. So you've had your fair share of run-ins with some of these type of people, it sounds like.
Yes.
And it must fascinate you, or you wouldn't be continuing to do them. Does it ever disturb you personally?
No, because children and adolescents, in my opinion, are curable, are treatable. And I enjoy the fact when a teenager comes in and attempts to pull the wool over my eyes and manipulate me in order to achieve his own ends. To me, that's fun. It's like a chess game.
Right, and it's kind of trying to unravel the puzzle of getting into their mind and their mindset to maybe turn them in a more acceptable, societally acceptable, mindset. So, you will know and you'll understand that a lot of my readings said if they're a sociopath or a psychopath, even showing up at a young age, they are untreatable. So I'm real curious what you're finding as effective treatment.
For example, now I work with a lot of boys at a group home in Junction City. The majority of them are from the Kansas City and the Johnson County area, Douglas County area. And some of them come from extremely wealthy families, some of them come from extremely poverty-ridden families. And so I don't, in my opinion, there's no socioeconomic basis for deciding on who's psychopath and who's sociopath. But it seems like parents who forgive everything and excuse everything and maybe vicariously want to live through their children, as we saw, for example, in Kaylee Anthony's trial with the mother on the stand, trying to excuse her, cover for cover her for her behavior and excuse her behavior. And the father, on the other hand, who's apparently was ex-law enforcement and knows how to cover up a crime scene and tamper with evidence, and apparently was having an affair and was charged with sexual abuse by Kaylee Anthony.
Well, it's just getting good.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
this just goes on and on.
When you have parents like
real
that,
life soap opera.
People have to learn how to cope, and one of the ways they can cope is by sociopathy.
So obviously we're saying, now Casey Anthony is, am I correct, was the daughter on trial?
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
Casey.
Kaylee was the
little girl that got killed.
Right.
For some reason I was listening to you and thinking I was getting those confused.
I was.
Okay,
also.
okay. So you're saying that someone like Casey Anthony, who obviously did grow up in an extremely dysfunctional family, which did come out also in this trial, one way she would learn to cope with all of that would be to turn to sociopathy.
Right. We'll use people. I'm not going to deal with this. I'll try to get around it. I'll lie my way out. I'll manipulate my way out. I'll make up fantasies.
Right. And so you're basically, in what you've just talked about there, talking about that nurture, meaning the family environment, the upbringing, the parenting, whatever that might be, versus nature, which would be the biological component of, possibly something happening in the brain. How do you believe there's also a genetic or biological component to sociopathy?
It's a combination. I mean,
Okay.
I can't make a toadstool out of a chair. So that, yes, there has to be some sort of genetic predisposition. And there are people who have extremely large consciences, and there are people who seem to be born even at an early age behave in a way that they don't seem to have a conscience, like enjoying crushing animals, bugs,
Exactly.
and tearing the family pet apart, and stuff like
Flushing
that.
the new kitten. I read, again, so many stories of that, but also when I was reading about what we always think about, the killing or mutilation of animals with just complete disregard for, or any sense of feeling remorse or guilt. And in fact, it seems to be the reading I did that many of them do it with a sense of pleasure.
Right, it's
Right.
enjoyable. It
Right.
feeds
It
a
feeds
person
something.
certain part of the brain that makes me feel good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you are still saying, though, it can't be just poor
Right.
parenting or poor
Right.
upbringing or even
Right.
sexual abuse, which would be
Right.
horrible to deal with.
Right.
And of course, that was alleged in Casey Anthony's trial. But it also has to be that genetic component.
Yes.
Which makes me then go back to where you're saying it is treatable.
Bingo.
Yeah.
There
Good
are
point.
some places where, yes, if it is overwhelmingly genetic, it probably isn't treatable. But in a lot of places with kids, it is a matter of the nurture situation and parents living vicariously through the child rather than trying to be a parent to the child.
Well, if you're just tuning in, just want to let you know we're here talking to Richard Burnett, a social worker who's dealt with sociopathy in his long career as a counselor. You're listening to Joan on the Joan Jerkovich Show, 910 KINA. We're going to continue our conversation here without a break because it's very fascinating. We've been talking about nature versus nurture, and so we're saying there has to be a little bit of that component of genetics. But if you catch them early enough, what age would you say they might be able to learn new skills or
Well,
brain
there have
pathways?
been studies shown that, yes, brain parenting, even toddlers at a very early age, it's not unusual, for example, for a 4 or 5-year-old to look at their mother and say, I hate you.
Oh, yeah, right.
And hopefully the mother becomes distressed, maybe even cries and says, that's a terrible thing, don't you ever say that. But there are some mothers who, when the child is 4 or 5 and says, I hate you, the mother looks back, I hate you too.
Yeah, right.
I mean, this is the nurture part of sociopathy. Yes.
But then also we have, and it was kind of heartbreaking with some of the reading I did about the really wonderful parents. I think Jeffrey Dahmer would fit into that category. I watched the interview with his father, and his father was completely blindsided by the behaviors he had. Seemed like a very compassionate, caring person. You really couldn't put your finger on something. I don't know if there's anything come out about the BTK. We've never heard anything about him, having had a really horrendous upbringing.
But one has to wonder about Jeffrey Dahmer. He seemed to, I saw the interviews also with him as well as his dad, and he seemed to enjoy crushing animals at a very young age. And the parents never noticed this.
Well, I didn't get the feeling his father did, but that also brings up an interesting point too, because when you're talking about the mutilation and killing of animals, we know that's extreme. But aren't there all levels of this? Because one of the things that I was reading, even with young children or adolescents and youth, that they may not all be killing animals, but they're still sociopaths, or they can still be psychopaths, because...
Right. Not everyone who takes a leg off an ant is going to turn into a sociopath.
I might have done that.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I'm not a sociopath.
Right.
But what that reminds me is, again, and I will say that I took some of my information from Robert D. Hare, PhD, who actually, after 25 years of research, developed a clinical tool called the Psychopath Checklist. He's very interested in identifying these individuals so that we can keep them or keep society safe from them. But of course, it's a tool that's to be used by professionals who know exactly how to use it. But one of the things he was talking about with children was early behavior problems is one of the indicators of a sociopath or a psychopath. And he said, again, that they may not all go to the extremes of, one of the other things besides hurting animals was hurting their siblings. I mean, we're talking about 4 and 5-year-olds who will